Our demonstrating artist tonight was born and raised in Northern California and is currently based in Vallejo. He teaches both studio and plein air workshops. He is a signature member of the CWA with paintings in the 50th National Show, in the 48th National, and in the 47th National Watercolor Exhibition. He also exhibits at the Plein Air Gallery and the Gardner Gallery. The Plein Air Gallery is in Benicia, and you can see his works on display there. I like asking artists for an aha moment when they realized something that impacted their career or their decision to become an artist or to choose the technique that they choose. And so with our artist tonight, Stephen recalls when he first discovered watercolors as an adult. He was in his early 30s, taking a class at a local junior college. The paper was wet and he was dropping color in with his brush, just playing. He watched, chuckling under his breath as the pigment bloomed across the paper, dancing to the invisible laws of water and gravity over and over again. He thought, damn, that was sexy. There was no learning to like it. It was an easy joy to find right from the get-go. Our artist tonight feels that paying attention and being wholeheartedly engaged in what you are doing is a simple, undervalued pleasure. And painting is a tool which encourages him to do just that. That is why he began to paint and why he continues to do so. He likes experimenting. It is a relationship and a dance. When I found out that Stephen felt that way, I realized that's exactly how I feel about painting. And perhaps many of you also feel that same way. Let us welcome tonight Stephen Barry. Stephen?
Hi, thank you very much for that very nice and embarrassing introduction. This one has to get used to that sort of stuff. I am gonna start tonight. We're gonna work on, it's a paint along format. So if you've got your stuff ready to paint and work on your notan, that's what we're gonna be working on. And for the first maybe 30 minutes or so, we're going to focus on composition. And I'm gonna, rather than in the past, I've sometimes have shown the notan that I've already made and talked about it, but we're gonna actually build the notan together. So that should be fun. The painting itself is relatively straightforward. It's more of a sketch, but it'll be good to practice the composition tools. These are the sorts of things that are gonna really stick with you in the long run as an artist. I think if you're putting in the hours, your technique will improve with time. And the harder part is really to figure out, now that you're not following a teacher anymore in the class and you want to do your own work, how do you compose, interesting work from your own photographs or your own memory or however it might be. So that's a lot of what the workshop's about. And that's going to be what we're going to start on tonight. So what I want is, I want to zoom in just a moment. I'm going to go to, can you make camera 1, please, be the spotlight? Thank you. No, camera 1. Well, I can't get it to zoom in anymore. Maybe my wife can do the magic thing. Did you just meet my cat? He was on my chair.
Oh.
So I almost sat on him. It's not gonna zoom in now, is it? Isn't that
right.
weird?
I'm gonna see if we can see your cat. Oh no, I guess we can.
No.
Oh, I see a tail. I see a tail at the bottom there.
Camera 1, pardon me, is now the spotlight. Is that correct?
camera 2, but I'm going to change it back to camera 1. I just want to
There we
see your
go.
cat. All right.
And what I want to do is zoom in, but it won't let me. We're going to have to just do it the way we are now. Right? It is what it is. So this is my Pentel brush pen. And this is what I use to make my notans. But like I said, if you have charcoal or Conti or things that have a sort of thick body, then that'll work well for the notan, because what I want to try and get away from is just drawing an outline and then kind of coloring it in. What we want to do is sort of paint shapes, not just lines. So I'm going to be using this Pentel brush pen, and this is what I'll be using when I'm teaching the workshop. And then I also have a little assortment of tools that I use to paint white. So for the notans, this is particularly important because the goal is to sort of massage the image to get it to do what we need it to do. So, right, we're going to use some opaque white. I have a little bit of gouache in the tube. I have a little white pen. It's called a Signo, I guess, Signo by Unibulb. And this has a little fine line of white that it does. And then I have here, it's called a Posca or a Posca, the Uniposca. And it has a kind of acrylic that's in the body of this little tip. So I'll be using these after I've gone in with the black. And I also, it's going to be interesting now. I can't zoom in. So we have these images, and I'm going to stand up so that I can bring my phone closer to my camera. Everybody has gotten these images in your email, or if you went to my blog, the images were on my blog, right? And we've got here one where the little barn is off to the right, and one where the little barn is in the center. And I'm sure, like many people, you take many photos when you're at a location, and some are better than others. But I try not to delete all my photos. And part of the reason I don't delete them is sometimes there are little leftover pieces that are compelling or interesting, and they help. So it's pretty obvious to me that when I'm building a composition, I want to find a focal point, and the focal point will often be where there's the highest contrast. So in something like this, it would be, come back, little image. It would be where this door has a dark outline, and then in the interior is a highly saturated, pale valued little pocket it's caught. So this little door is what I'm imagining is going to be my focal point. So I'm trying to find the focal point at the beginning. And then the goal is oftentimes to sort of zoom in on the focal point, right? Sometimes people have these big images and they have a lot of area around a focal point that it's not about the subject, right? So one of the things we can do is begin to sort of zoom in. It's nice to have your subjects exit the frame of the painting, right? Rather than having the entire thing captured inside of the image. It sometimes can be very pleasant to have it exit the frame a little bit. It gives you a feeling that there's more to be seen, because there is more to be seen, right? And that can make it more compelling. And it also begins to divide up the little shapes. So rather than having this big monolithic barn shape and then the sky around it, I can bring it in and I can begin to integrate the two. The other thing that I like to do is, right, we're going to talk about, usually you would do some sort of rule of thirds. I like to call it an active balance. The goal is to create points of interest that create weight in an image, but to not have it be, we don't want it in the middle. That's inactive and doesn't let your eye meander. We want something that's very strong. And then we need something else that's compelling that'll capture our eye. So these little things, these extra points of contrast become useful. For example, these little light white areas here, and then in here I have the primary focal point, and over here I have all these little sections in here. But I also recognized here in this discarded photo, really like this little piece way over here on the right. I find this little object interesting. I don't even know what it is, but it just provides an additional point of interest off to the side to create balance with what's going on the other side. So when we go and start the notan, I'm actually going to combine these two photos, and I'm going to explore whether having this additional focal point over here is compelling. We have this very strong piece here, this little piece over to the side, and then over here, this very active space on the left. That can be very useful for allowing the eye to meander through the image and find multiple points of interest. I'm going to remove part of the sky because the sky isn't particularly interesting. And I want to bring you into the barn, right? But I like how the barn is not centered in this first image. And then we have this little spot over here where the eye can begin to rest and bring it around. So I just want to kind of give people a sense of, what did I just do? There we go. A little sense of how we're composing this image, right? We have multiple points of interest. We have the focal point. We're going to zoom in on the focal point, make it more powerful. And then the other thing that I like to do is to provide ways to exit and enter the shapes that we're interested in. So for example, here we have this really interesting mishmash. It looks like part of the roof fell down. There used to be an old structure here. But all of that jazz in there is really interesting visually. It allows little points to enter and little points to exit and sort of weaves the two shapes together. So that's part of the problem for me with this image as it is there's not very many ways to enter the barn and exit the barn visually. When we begin to exit the screen, we sort of break up that monolithic structure. And instead, we have this tree over here on the right that has many dispersed little values that we can integrate. And on the left, we have this broken down barn, right? So I just want to sort of talk a little bit in the beginning. I wanted to just talk about these elements of composition and what makes an image more or less compelling. The other thing I like in this image, by the way, is it has a lot of leading lines. So these little crops, I'm going to gently tilt them and I'm going to it'll help pull you back into the barn, right? So that's also a useful little tool. And that part's that. I want to show you what I did. It's very quiet. Is everybody hearing me okay?
I think they are.
Hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
So yesterday I did go through the process of painting this. The image is centered, right? Or not centered, but it's visible.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I did this preliminary sketch yesterday, and this is obviously based on the image, the photograph where the barn is entirely in it. And definitely on completing it, I felt like, well, that's a reasonable representation of the photo. But I really wish that I had more ways to enter and exit the barn. And just to sort of demonstrate this feeling about what happens when I begin to crop things, like this to me is a more interesting composition than having this giant sky and it's not an active sky, right? It's not much to it right now. And the barn is a big fat geometric shape. So I'm going to be doing something where on the new image, I'm actually going to take the shape that we have for the paper and I'm going to tape off a section, and it's going to help us create an image that is more rectilinear, less square, right? And we're going to build this new shape. So
I see what you did with the darks in the rows, kind of leading you into that shadow, which then
Yes.
leads you into the barn. I like
yes,
that.
just a little bit in here is enough, right? So let's look at this notan. Yeah, we're good. So
I do want to let people know that if you have questions for Steve, to please either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself for the question and just ask him directly. Either one will work.
So the barn is the most important thing. So I'm going to start with the barn. And it's oftentimes easier to block in the shape. And then we're going to open it back up with some of the white elements, right? When we need to. When we do the no-tan, it really helps us see little problems, things that we'd like to solve in the image that will help us later. So, for example, as I begin to block in the shape of this barn, I know in the photograph that there's two values. There's a really dark value, which is the interior of the barn. And then there's also the exterior of the barn, which is in shadow, but is actually not as dark. So that's a little problem when we're doing a no-tan. The no-tan makes us recognize that we have two dark values stacked, one on top of the other, basically. So what I'm going to start to do here is I am creating a little edge on the door to help communicate this kind of Russian, babushka doll experience where we have a dark value inside of a dark value, a frame inside of a frame. The sequence of contrasts is very strong. So just by having that little seam, maybe there's a piece of light that comes in from the broken piece of the barn, and that helps it maybe illuminate that little section. That can be very useful. The other thing I see as I come in here, we have this we have this active little space in here where there's a dark shadowed tree behind it. It's framing it again. Yes?
Stephen, some folks don't know what a no-tan is. Would you like to give them a little more background?
Thank you for prompting me. In Japanese, a no-tan means black-white. And it's a little different than a value sketch, right? A value sketch, you might have 3 or 4 values, white, black, gray, maybe 2 middle gray values, and you're thinking about how you're going to break up your values in your image. That's super useful. There's nothing wrong with value sketches. A no-tan only uses black and only uses white. So it forces us, of course, if something's very pale in the image, it's going to go into the white section. And if something is very dark in the image, it's going to go into the black, right? That's the obvious part about a no-tan. The hard part to think about for the no-tan is where do the gray values go? And you begin to have to assign them to either the white in the paper, to the image, or to the black in the image. And when you start to stack your values, a couple of things happen that I find really useful. One is that sometimes we have 2 dark values stacked on top of each other, which is what we've got going on in this image of the barn, right? We have the dark face of the barn, and then they have the interior of the barn, and it's even darker. But really, they're both very dark, and they would both be black. So when we stack them, sometimes we find problems, and we recognize that we have to create some kind of contrast in that area to make the image read particularly well. So that's one of the really useful tools that a no-tan does. We're going to discover something similar when we go to do the pale values in this no-tan in a minute. Also, by crushing the values down just to black and just to white, you're going to begin to recognize if, say, the image is properly balanced, if there are ways that you could introduce additional elements to create that balance that you're looking for. Sometimes maybe there's a tree over onto the right of this barn in this image. And if I'm not careful, I'll make it a big dark blob. But I know that actually it has little holes in its canopy and I need to open it up. So I'm going to need to introduce the white to do that. So it's just a way for us to easily understand and see contrast. And that'll be very useful when we do the painting, because everything that's white is going to be in the pale first wash, and then everything that's really dark is going to go in on our second wash, and then we'll put in little details and things at the end. So it can also help us see how we want to build the sequence for painting the image. So I don't do a notan every time, but I do a notan every time I'm failing at a painting. So if I'm dissatisfied with an image and I don't know why it's working, then my wife tells me, well, did you make a notan? So right. No, I didn't make a notan. I gotta go make one now. So that's what a notan is. Thank you very much for reminding me to explain that better.
And I do have a request that you tell us the names of those pens again, or the type.
Yes, that's a great idea. So this is called a Pentel brush pen, Pentel. And this is my favorite pen. I love to draw with this. This pen is like, I don't know, $10, $5, it's nothing. But what it comes with is a little cartridge. And these little cartridges, you can get more of them. This is great for traveling. If you like the idea of a brush pen, you can have an extra cartridge, and it can go in an airplane and it won't leak because it's sealed still. So I often carry an extra one when I'm traveling. This is great, and it's cheap, and they're disposable, and it really does have little, I don't know if we can see that, but little bristles. So that's lovely for a cheap $10 pen. This little guy is called a Signo, and it is S-I-G, here it is on the cap, S-I-G-N-O. It's by Uniball. And this is nice. So if I come back in, I can draw in other little pieces of white, and it can help me create just a little bit of contrast here and there in the image. And then I have here, it's called a Posca or Uniposca or Posca, and it has kind of an acrylic ink in this. This has a fatter, broader nib, so it can also be helpful if it works.
Is that P-O-S-K-A?
P-O-S-C-A. This one works okay, but my favorite that I've been using is the Signo. This one it's almost like a little bit of whiteout. And then, of course, I have just some like white gouache and permanent white, but I also sometimes use, titanium white or other sorts of things like that. So, and these are nice. It provides kind of a brush-like feel. I'll show you how I use that in a minute. So for building the barn, I'm making the barn face more active than it is in the photo. It's too dark and solid for me in the photo.
Okay, so you're adding some white.
I am, compared to the photo.
There.
I just want something to pull the eye in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to let some of the greenery come around the edge and be lit, so that we get the idea of where the base of the barn is. Then the barn has a shadow, and it completes this picture frame around this very important focal point. And out it comes. Something like this. And I can already see that the barn is wider. So I'm just going to bring it in more. There we go. And it's even wider. So this is the process that I go through. It's not, one and done. I'm building the image, definitely. And I have to figure out how to, part of making it is to become acquainted with the subject matter. So over here, I do have the very interesting broken down roof line. I don't have to match the roof line. I just have to make it compelling, right? That's the goal. So I'm just looking at it. I'm trying to find the big shapes. This comes down to the ground. This sticks out, right? It's something like that. And primarily, it's a dark shape over a light shape. And it provides little ways for us to exit the white and enter this dark valued barn, right? That's a lot of the purpose in terms of why am I including it in the image. Has a little cast shadow, and I'm playing make-believe, bringing that cast shadow around here to provide also a way to see the front of the barn and the foot of the barn so that the light sneaks around it. I don't feel guilty about that. Some people are like, well, it's not in the photo, but maybe if I had come by 20 minutes earlier, that light might have been there. It just wasn't there when I took this photo. So it isn't as if it didn't exist. I'm sure it probably did exist at a certain point. It just didn't exist when I was taking this photo. So, and in the end, what's left behind is the painting, right? And that's what needs to be compelling. So here we have the barn. Now, I have over here in the second photo, we have this little quirky object that's in the background. So the barn comes down to the ground plane, which is about there. And this is actually very gently behind the barn. It's not on the same plane as the foot of the barn. It has little pockets of interesting little holes where we're providing contrast, right? We're little ways to enter, to weave the dark shape and the light shape together. And then we have the tree. And the tree in the photos is bonded to the barn in terms of it being a dark shape next to a dark shape. That little line I have there for the edge of the barn, I like that. So I'm going to mostly keep it. And then it comes into here and it actually exits the side of the painting. So we're creating little interesting shapes. We have an interesting shape here. We have an interesting shape in here. We're capturing little spaces, right? To make it compelling. And now what happens is we have a way to capture the shadow that extends from the barn. And I like that fact. That was something that was missing when I did the test one. You know, and I'm always talking on the blog about that I iterate paintings and I paint them more than once. And I often find that the best way to really get to know a subject is to paint it. It's hard to get around it. And what am I going to say? That's true. So I feel like sometimes you just got to paint it to become knowledgeable about what you could do better. And sometimes people just want it to be straightforward from the beginning, but it's just not that way. So
I am amazed how much that feels like you've improved it already.
right? You know, it's funny. I like to take credit for it, and I guess I can. But what also happened was somebody posted the photo, and it got cropped in the photo. I was like, hey, that's the ticket right there, man. All right, I need to remind myself that I have these compelling shapes. And then I'm going to go to the other photo. And in this photo, what's really important here is that this extends over. So we're going to have an open space for the eye to rest. I'm going to try and close that and reopen it. And I'm going to pull the photo back out. Perfect. There it is. So we have this area over on the left because otherwise it's too centered, right? That's what we didn't like about this other image that shows this quirky thing over here. It doesn't have enough balance. So we need a little bit of space over here to get this focal point to not just be sitting like a, nail sitting in the middle of the image. It needs some sort of diversity. And then as the crops go back, they become more horizontal. And then as they come in, they very slowly begin to rotate. Something like this. I don't need it to be like an arrow pointing to the focal point, but they all guide me towards the barn. The other thing that's missing here that I wanted to say was that there is this layer in the photo, if you guys have the photo available in the background. There's just this little soft area back here, and it provides a sense of distance. And it even appears over on the right-hand side of the barn. So one of the things, if you use an app, oh, that was loud. If you use an app like Notinizer or something, what it will often do is it'll crush the values for you to black and white, right? But it just takes the photo and does your thinking for you. But when we start to do it by hand, one of the things that we have to start deciding is like, well, is that area in the back important to me? And it is to me because it provides a sense of depth. So when we make a note-10, it isn't just about making the darks dark and the lights light or whatever. It's also about choosing these middle values and deciding, well, that's a contrast that's important. So I need to put it into the note-10 for the image to read. And that'll make me be aware that that's a contrast that I need to put into the painting. So I'm going to drop this horizon line very delicately back in here. And we don't want it to compete too much, but we want just enough to allow us to see that there's a distance. And in this one, there's also even a pole that exits the painting. And I like that. It helps divide the space up, right? We were talking before about sort of combating monolithic shapes, providing ways to divide the painting into interesting shapes and to provide ways to exit and enter those shapes. We don't want them to be so closed that we can't get in or out of them. We want to be able to travel through the painting.
So I was wondering how you were going to put in those midtones with only black and white, but I see it now.
Right? It's as I like to think of it, the note-10 is more about localized contrast in that area of the painting than it is about sort of qualitative contrast, right? Where it's like, well, this is a 1 on the value of 4, and that's a 4, so I can't include the 4s, they're too pale or whatever, right? It's about the local value, the local contrast, so that we know in that area, right, we need to include it. Why? Because we needed to be able to read that contrast is important. So, but I'm not, as an example, doing a big fat blob because it is a lighter value. Mm-hmm. So to me, this note-10 is well on its way. It is almost 8. That's just about right. I want about an hour for us to do the painting. Now, I just want to say the other thing is we can go in with white. So if I, and this is something that I'm normally doing with my note-10s, right? We often are, man, that thumb hurts. We're often, well, we're human. We make little mistakes. We have things we want to change after we put them in, right? And it's important to be able to explore the image to include the values that we want. That's the point of the note-10. So if I want to, for example, I like these little bits of white. This is actually playing on what's in the image, but I want more white over here. It's too big and empty. And this little object should have little pieces of white in it. And then I'm going to break up the edge of the shadows that are going into the vegetation. And I can see that we have that there, little entrance points to make this very dynamic corner really interesting.
Steve, is that Pentel brush pen, is that water soluble or is that more of a permanent?
It is water soluble, a little. So I don't do washes over it. You can go through a fancy process of getting a different kind of carbon ink cartridge, and then you can put it in it and blah, blah, blah. And then you can have a non-water soluble pen if you would like to have it be non-water soluble. But well, we could look it up on the internet. I've read about it, but I haven't done it. So, and then just to use this pen, just to show, maybe I need to show that this has an eave underneath it, right? And break it up just a little, something like this. And right now I've left behind the photo, and I'm just exploring the image to make it say what I want it to say, right? And then the other thing I did like is that there was little bits of heavier shadows. I'm using here the side of the Pentel brush pen to create stronger value contrasts, right?
And somebody would also like to know if you've had any problem with a pen like that leaking at altitude in a plane, because you mentioned you take it to travel.
I have not, is the short answer.
Okay.
I think if you were very concerned, I would take out and dispose of the cartridge that you've got in it, and then just bring unused cartridges in the airplane, which are sealed. And I've not had those leak at all. So that would be a simple way to resolve that problem, right? Just dispose of the cartridges that you have available. Bring a couple of them as yet unopened cartridges. So this is what we got. This is the notan that I've built for this. If you've been building your own notan, I know oftentimes on the Facebook page, we'll share the final stuff that I'll be doing. And I would be very interested to see other people's notans and how it's going for you. It's a learned process, right? It's not like, I don't know, well, even riding a bike, we had to learn it, right? I want this to go over more. I can see this now. Why? Because it's too balanced. I still want this this is a rule of thirds for the whole painting, but even within the barn, I want this door to be off to the side at the third. So what I did was I expanded the barn. And now I'm going to come in and add some of the white back in. Grab the gouache. There we go. I'm just trying to move the whole thing over. Okay, let's rock and roll. So now I've got the notan. And just to compare it, this is what I'm going to be painting. This will be guiding us. This is what I had before. This is what the photo, this is a reasonable representation of the photo, but I didn't find it very compelling. So this is what we got instead. Everything that's white in this notan, we're going to do in the first wash. So if we want something to go in the sky, all the greens that we're going to use, they're all going to go top to bottom. Then we'll blow it dry and we'll do our dark values on top. I'm going to paint, broadly speaking, I'm going to paint around the barn. It's simple structure. Behind this really complicated area, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time delicately painting around these dark values. We're just going to paint over it, and then the dark values will mask it. Watercolor doesn't get enough credit for being opaque when we need it to be. So for these dark values, that shouldn't be a problem. And the same thing goes for the tree. If we want something behind the tree or whatever, we would do it. We would just paint it in there and the tree would go over the top.
So typically you'd go from light to dark?
I am painting light to dark, yes. And the notan is letting us understand what we have to paint in the light values, and then a lot of what's going to go in the dark values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this up here, and I think, yes, you guys can still see the notan. And we're going to bring in the fresh piece. So for the, oh, goodbye notan, I need that room. So I'm going to be painting on a gator board. It's a 1/2 inch thick. It's very rigid, and I've taped my paper to it. Sometimes I like to wet the back of the paper when I'm painting wet into wet, and I want to like stretch the watercolor clock and have more time available before everything dries. But for something like this where we want it to dry fast, I just tape it down. And I need a pencil.
Would you get the same effect using a watercolor block?
Yes, I think you would get the same effect using a watercolor block. But I do find if you don't tape it down or have it in a watercolor block, that sometimes what happens is the water will bead up at the edges, and then you'll have cauliflowers and blossoms on the side of your paper. And this seems to help that problem go away. So you need to either tape it down or use a block or wet the back. But I don't really like to just have the paper sit, particularly if we're doing a big wet wash. So first things first, the focal point is going to go somewhere up in this area, maybe even more up. The barn is off-centered. And yeah, just going to block in the shape.
I don't know if you want to draw a little harder or just for us to use our imagination, but it is very hard to see lines.
Well, see, the problem is that if I draw it really hard, well, I would never normally draw that hard, right?
Right.
So, and when we draw really hard, the problem is that we end up sort of carving. It's harder to be loose with your pencil work when you're drawing really hard. And so I do think it's important to be light and loose with your pencil so that we can paint the image with our brush and not with the pencil, if that makes sense. So
sure.
So I'm going to try and talk my way through what I'm doing in the hopes that will help guide other people. I do like to make a simple sketch, particularly for these geometric shapes. So I have the focal point identified and I have the barn shape identified. I'm going to very gently kind of mark in this idea of where the tree is going to go, right? And I have this distant horizon line that I did in the notan. There's some sort of object down here. It's behind the barn. So it's up from the base of the barn. And then the shadow goes off to the side. And then over here, I'm going to just mark this idea that the shape needs to continue. I didn't do what I was going to say.
And what kind of pencil are you using for your sketch?
I'm currently using a Prismacolor Premier, but give me about 15 seconds. I'll come right back.
All right, great. I had not seen a notan done in that manner with the black and the white and playing around with it and changing it. I like that idea a lot.
Yes. One, I like it. Two, it works and it's very helpful. So yeah. As a combo, I'm all for that. So what am I doing? It's like a cardinal sin. I'm gonna start over. You know why? Because I really wanted to do this, and I wanted to let the notan communicate to the final piece. And part of what the notan made clear was that we wanted it to be more rectilinear and less square. So, yeah. Fortunately, I caught myself in the first
Why can't you take it off the bottom? Why couldn't you just cut off the bottom and use it that way?
Well, the problem is that the barn was too big.
Oh.
So even if I cut the bottom off, the barn was sort of taking over. So what I really want is for it to relate to this notan, and this notan, it it's definitely longer and not as square. So that's fine. I'm using a little, this is a Prismacolor water colored pencil. They're nice and soft, and I like that about them. Part of what I like about this alternative format, which was that we were gonna have the barn not be so centered, is that it provides a stretched perspective, meaning it's wider. So we have a little more room to play with having everything get included, but not making the barn so centered. So once again, I'm drawing in the focal point, which was this frame within a frame, because that's very important. And I've drawn in the barn off-centered. And once again, I'm drawing in the basic shape of the tree, just the canopy of the tree. I'll try and bring this up to the camera in just a moment. Here, I'm going to notate that I wanted to preserve a little white on the left corner of the barn. We talked about that. I have that funny little object that I like over here to provide an alternative point of interest over here on the right-hand side. And then we have this jumble of interesting objects, this broken roof line or something. And what I'm really just doing right now is indicating that they're there. I'm looking at the notan. I'm not even looking at the photo right now. I'm going to paint that with the brush. I'm not going to be a slave to the pencil. And then in here, we have a little piece of the horizon line that connects to, so like weeds, they're sticking up. They extend from the base of the barn. And then we have this little section in the distance. And I'm not going to draw the pole. I don't want the pole. I don't want to have to follow the pole. I just want to indicate where the pole's going to go. And then I'm going to paint the pole. So I'll draw like the base of the pole. The thing to think about, we were talking about having everything not be exactly balanced. So the thing to think about when we're introducing something like a pole, I mean, the pole is just there to make the barn more interesting, is to help us divide space. So the pole shouldn't go right in the middle of that big empty space to the left of your barn. The pole needs to also divide the space in an interesting way. So I'm going to put the pole slightly to the left of center so that we begin to divide the space. And now one space is bigger, one space is smaller. It provides something that's more interesting. It's not so perfectly balanced. And I'm going to provide the barest, lightest indicator of these rows of crops to help guide me. So now I'm going to show you guys the sketch. Can you see this better now?
Yes.
Right? So you get a sense, a lot of these things, like, yes, this is very important. It's the focal point, and the barn edge is important. But a lot of these things are just there to help guide us later. So I don't want to have to be a slave to the pencil. I want to paint it with my brush. But I want to know, oh yeah, that's to help me remember that I'm supposed to do something. So this is what we've got. I am only using 3 colors for this painting. So I have ultramarine blue, and I have I like lemon yellow, but it could be any kind of cool yellow, right? A greeny yellow works well with something like ultramarine blue to help you get nice, vibrant greens. And I'm going to use burnt sienna as my orange to help me have some warm colors, but also to let me make my darks. So, and it can be really helpful to have only, to have a limited palette when you're painting. It just helps you focus your color and create unity and choose what your greens are going to be by mixing them rather than having it dictated to you by what the green happens to be in your palette. So I'm going to take some water and I'm going to wet the sky because the sky is basically white in the photo.
And what size brush are you using there?
This is a little Chinese brush that I like, and it doesn't have a size. It is about it's about the ferrule, which is where the bristles meet the shaft, is about 1/4 inch wide. So just to give you a sense, and it's a natural hair, so it's nice. And then what you can see I'm doing here is I'm just adding water a little bit here and a little bit there in the tree area. I don't want it everywhere, so that we'll have a variety of soft and hard lines, sort of to emphasize both this kind of gently, like a bright fog is what we have the effect, but also that there's little soft edges where you can enter the tree's form and into the barn. And then there are hard edges where it provides a contrast to that, and that can be compelling. So ultramarine blue, a little bit of lemon yellow, and we've got a kind of a blue green. It's a cooler green. I get a little bit of more water on the brush, and I'm just dropping in I'm daubing it off, these little guys in the distance, right? The crops are some sort of young crop that is vibrant and green, a rich honeyed green. So I'm going to get more yellow on the brush and begin to mix it into the green that I already had. And I'm going to get even more yellow, get a nice and limey green. Get a little water on my brush to dilute it. And then I'm going to drop it in. And I'm going to go through those little broken pieces, the broken roof pieces. I don't have to worry about them because they're going to be a dark value on top. You don't have to sweat it too much. I mean, if I was painting on a full sheet and I was going to spend 10 hours making the painting, that's different. But this is a sketch. So I think we should be okay with that experience. What I'm going to take is I'm going to take that same kind of blue-green that we had at the beginning, and I'm going to drop it in over here to be the same background. That was too blue, so I'm just dropping in another color, another yellower green. Getting more of the lemon yellow. I want the batch to be vibrant. This is the section that's catching a lot of light, right? And then I have this area in the foreground. Get a lot of lemon yellow and a little bit more ultramarine blue. And this is the thing that's really interesting about having a limited palette when we're mixing is you have to kind of decide how vibrant it is or how soft it is. And then in comes this vibrant hue. I'm going to connect it. I'm dragging the brush flat, and that's creating lots of little broken edges. And I like to keep them there. They make it interesting. And they capture little specks of light as if they were bouncing off the foliage.
Is that rough paper that you're using?
I'm using Anders Waterford rough. That is correct. So I used to use a lot of Arches rough, and that's also a nice paper. I like rough because it's very easy to get texture. Here you can see I'm dragging the brush as if I'm following the lines of the crops, and it's creating very gently a feeling of the linearity of the crops, as if there was little bits of light shining on the crops, rather than going back and forth horizontally, which will create light in a different pattern, right? So I want these little speckles to communicate the leading lines that I had taking me in towards the focal point. The other thing we need to do is drop in the very light green for the space behind the in our focal point. So actually, I want it to be even yellower. So I'm going to get a really vibrant, just the lemon yellow. And it's going to go just in the interior lit section of the barn door where we can see through the barn, right? The frame within the frame.
Question
Yes,
about focal points.
Yes.
As you have a focal point and points of interest, around how many points of interest might you suggest? Just a few?
I think if you're trying to like learn the technique of it, something like 3 total, including your focal point, is nice, right? So we have a little triangle and we're trying to not make it equilateral, right? We want to have some side be more dominant and some side be less dominant. As we get more sophisticated and more knowledgeable and more skilled, it's nice to have, you could have maybe a total of 5, let's say, including your focal point. So a focal point, and then you have other little pieces that connect. But the goal is mostly to provide enough interest that you want to move through the painting so that I'm not just sort of static and sitting just on the focal point.
Can you move your painting just a wee bit up and to the right? There, perfect, thank you.
Okay. So while it's wet, I'm going to start working a little bit wet into wet. I'm going to get a darker valued green. I'm going to get my ultramarine blue. Everything right now, everything I've done, 100% is just ultramarine blue and lemon yellow, nothing else. So I have this kind of darker valued green here that I'm mixing up. More blue in it. Why? Because it's going to be a shadow color. What we're going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm not going to whack it on my finger. Instead, I'm going to flick it with my finger like this. It's a nice way to get some organic texture in it while it's still wet. And you can direct it so it's nice. It won't go into the sky, as an example, right?
That's a little bit hard to see what you're doing. You're just pulling back on the bristles with your finger?
I am. I'm just grabbing the bristles and then I release it. And when I do that, we get little bits of green.
Ah.
And then that is gonna be soft because it's within the wet into wet. So it'll slowly soften more and more. And I'm gonna mix up a little more. I daub it off and then I can use the side of the brush. I can get little bits of these shadowy lines that are the crop, right? Kind of going in towards it. And I'm just.
And this is still a little bit wet underneath, so
it is.
dispersed a little.
Everything is still wet. And that's why I'm doing it now instead of later. So in it goes. And I'm using the side of the brush. When I lay the brush down, I can use the belly of the brush. And that will let me grab the texture of the paper more. Okay. This is a good spot to pause and let this dry. And I'm going to call in my lovely assistant. My love, can you help out? Thank you. This is the part where we're gonna dry our paintings, and then we're gonna come back in and we're gonna paint the barn and the tree and these other dark elements that were in from the no-tan. So everything that we've done right now, except for these little wet into wet sections that I did the darker valued shadows, everything in here is what is quote unquote the white of the background, right? The white of the no-tan. There you go, my love.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
So if I bring this no-tan back in, right? And I bring it up so people can see it a little better, right? Everything that we've done so far is, I don't know, 90% just the white. Then we're going to come back over this. We're going to paint the dark valued barn, and we'll paint the pole, a little bit of the darker shadows in here, and the tree, and we'll connect it to the barn. And we'll have more nuance of value than the no-tan allows. So we simplify it to make it black and versus white so that we can really see the subject and the composition, and then we complicate it when we paint it, right? And we're going to have a darker value here, and it'll be a paler value for the barn face, but it'll all be dark compared to the background, just the way it is in the photo.
Okay, and I think this is a good time for people to ask questions. Feel free to put your mic on and talk to Steve directly.
Yep.
So Steve,
Yes.
Camilla, so the focal point, I thought the focal point was going to be at the door. So it's not at the door. It's on the right side.
I think it is the door. I think there's, can you see the no-tan in the image currently?
Yeah.
Okay. To me, this area that I'm coloring in, and this to me is the focal point. I would agree with you. The doors is this gentle outline that I made.
Yeah.
And then inside of it, we have another dark value where I'm putting the brush pen right now. And then inside of that, I have another light value that's in here. And actually, even in this light value in the background where you're seeing through the barn, we have these dark leaves, and they frame an even smaller light value. So yes, to me, this is definitely the focal point, because we have a dark value within a dark, within a light, within a dark, right? It's this little sequence of frames all leading down into this area where we're looking through the barn door. So I do think that this is the focal point. It's approximately at the thirds, right? So it's pleasantly off-centered, which is nice. It allows us to sort of travel. We don't want to stay static. We want to move through the painting a little bit. But this little thing that I included over here on the right provides some sort of interest. And then definitely this stuff over here on the left provides another point of interest. But again, I like that the barn door isn't evenly divided between these two additional points of interest. It's gently off-centered. Even when I talk about these 3 points of interest, right? You have 1 point of interest here, another one there, and the focal point, of course, is also a point of interest. So it's also gently off balance. But I do consider it the focal point. Yes.
You typically use a sponge for excess water versus paper towels?
I do. So I like the sponge. I can put it in a Ziploc bag if I'm painting plein air or something like that. And then I have also a paper towel. But the paper towel for me is normally something that I use to daub off water on the painting itself.
Okay, so you keep your paper towel clean, and then you can use it.
I can, if I have a little section where there's maybe a bead of water that's too heavy, or I want to gently soften something that was too dark, I can daub it and lift it with the paper towel. I haven't been using it right now because the painting is a simple one so far, but I also have a little rag, and I keep it on my shoulder usually. It's a great way to ruin a t-shirt when you accidentally miss your rag and hit your shoulder instead. But I'll often daub things off very gently on the shoulder rag as well. So I do like to keep a tissue around though.
Stephen, when you wet the back of your paper,
Yep.
How wet do you allow it to get, and how long do you wait before you tape it down? And do you ever go back, lift up a corner and re-wet it while you're in a painting? The idea is to have softened shapes, I'm guessing.
It's interesting. So I'm not doing it for today's painting because we wanted it to dry faster, because I have to do it in the time frame of the demo, right?
Yeah.
But if I was painting for myself, and I wanted to stretch the amount of time before things dried, I would wet it. I don't know, 9 times out of 10. What I do is I wet just the back, not the front. And I usually I'll turn it over, I'll start upside down, and I'll wet it with my brush, right? I turn it over, I stick it onto the board, and water tension holds it in place.
Right.
I do not tape it. Water tension just holds it in place.
Right.
So if I'm wetting the back, it's an alternative technique, and I'm not taping it. I'm just wetting the back. And
How wet is it?
it's very wet on the back. It's got to be soggy. And oftentimes there's a space of about 5 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes, where I'm wetting the back, and then I stick it down and it starts to dry, and I peel it back up and I wet it some more. It's a messy process. I'm wetting it some more. I stick it back down. I put it over here. I turn it around. I get that side. I get it all wet. I stick it back down. The goal is to saturate the body of the paper like a sponge, and the surface of the paper remains dry. So when I'm painting in that technique, what ends up happening is that I can have all the hard edges that I want on the surface, because the surface, but when the paint goes into the body of the paper, it finds a reservoir of water in the sponge of the paper itself. So it will stay malleable and not dry for a long time. I can add the little edges, and I don't get little cauliflowers and whoops, that section dried. I wasn't ready for it to be dry yet. That stuff goes away because I have this reservoir of water within the paper.
So you can continue to paint with hard shapes on the surface.
100%.
But when you do want a soft shape, as you've done with the tree line there, then you wet the front a little bit.
Exactly. Yes. So it's 8:30. Ready?
Is it something that you do with most of your paintings, that wetting?
It is. It is. Particularly if I'm doing a large painting. If I'm doing a little sketch, maybe I won't. I might just tape it down, because if I'm doing a little sketch, I'm just interested in kind of completing the image. But if I'm doing a big painting, it gets more and more difficult to control things, right? In terms of when the water's done. So
Outside.
So for this barn, maybe we want to work the barn a little bit more. So we're going to wet the back, because the barn, we don't want it to dry while we're working it. So I am getting, it's literally dropping off my brush into a pool. It's quite wet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's watercolors. It's watercolors. So it's very wet. Sometimes after I do this, I actually have to pour off the excess, because it'll puddle up on the back. So I get all of it wet. Then I go and look in the light, right? Be like, oh, did I get it all? No, I missed a little spot. Oh, okay. Then it's done. Then I turn it over and I plop it down. And then I provide a bit of tension by pressing it into place so that the water tension functions, right?
Yeah.
And so if I was to turn this sideways or upside down, it's all stuck. Nothing's falling off.
Mm-hmm.
It's all stuck on there with water tension. And then if I want to maybe make a section wetter,
Right.
I wet the back, maybe even wet the board, and then press it back down. And then if I think, uh-oh, it's bleeding maybe around the exterior edges, which it can do, then I wipe it out. And now I'm ready to play.
Thank you.
Yes. So the barn. Let's rock and roll with this barn. So the barn and the trees. I'm gonna start with the trees, and I want a stiffer brush. I have here a little synthetic. The tree is all in shadow, right? It's a dark value in the no-tan that we made. So it's time for me to bring in my burnt sienna and the blue, get a little bit of lemon yellow, and I'm making a dark green, right? I'm looking at the surface. So right now, if I was to paint this, everything is dry brush, just to say, right? I'm doing this to demonstrate. And if I want a soft edge, I can grab water from my clean water dish, come in here, put a little water in. Now I can drop it in and it'll spread around a little bit, right? It's very gently spreading in the water. I want the green to be a little bluer and a little less drab, but it needs to be dark. So playing a little bit wet into wet, and I'm simulating the edge of the paper. There we go. So, and I'm looking at the no-tan that I made, right? Let me see if I can bring it into the painting. There we go, right?
Yeah, it's taking shape.
Yep. And it comes down into here. Something like this, and it goes off to the side, and I like that you can tell it's exiting the painting, right? It's exiting at the top, and it's exiting at the side. Then we're going to paint the barn, and I'm going to grab the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, and I'd like it to be warm, right? Not cool. It's got some sort of soft light. I'm gonna grab a bit of the lemon yellow, chop it in there. Got a nice kind of dark, earthy brown. Do a little tester, and away we go. So, when I'm working in a space like this, if I can remember to keep the whites in a certain little speck of white that I have in the no-tan, I will. But if I don't, I know I can go back in later for this sketch, and I can use a little bit of opaque gouache or something to add a highlight back in. So I'm not freaking out too much about it. I like when I lay the body of the brush flat, the belly, and I can drag it and I can capture little highlights. That can be very attractive, and I don't need to make it too monolithic. So I'm gently pulling it across the texture of the paper, the rough paper. And nothing's drying because I have wet the back of the paper. Like it to be a little warmer, so I'm grabbing a little more burnt sienna. And don't forget that these little sections of white are intended to be slats in the barn. So they should go up and down, right? Get them to do that.
Right.
I'm coming down to where in the no-tan, I was preserving that little bit of white because I wanted to see the base of the barn. And that's it has color, of course, it's the plant material. So now what I'm doing is I'm bringing this down to the edge of the plant material.
So the color that you're using for the barn,
Yep.
you mixed the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, is that right?
Primarily those two. I added a little bit of lemon yellow at one point, but the goal is that I want it to be a little warm, so I'm adding enough, making sure it's leaning to it is a warm gray. So it's definitely leaning towards the burnt sienna. And then I can play, right, with this. So I can, for example, I can grab a bit of water, daub it off on my sponge, daub it off, swipe it on my trusty, grungy little towel, and I can just begin to paint with water into this. I want to activate the surface so that it looks like something's there, right? It's not just this
Maybe
big
a
flat.
little bit of texture.
That's correct. So if I bring this up, you guys can get a little view. Oop, too much. I didn't daub it off. Yeah, the universe continues.
Mhm.
Right? So while it's wet, I can play with it, add a little bit of texture to the barn. You guys get a sense of that there? I think it's hard to see from a distance.
Yeah,
Then,
that helped too.
right?
Sure.
And then what I want next to do is to really get a nice thick dark. So for something like this, the brush is gooey. The paint is thick. I'm not mixing it with a bunch of water. There's already water in the whole thing anyways. Sometimes I'll actually mix it in the well and it'll have too much water in the well. And I have to find a little corner of my mixing space that's dry. So over here in the corner, I can do this. Why? Because the less water in my little ratio, the thicker and the darker the pigment mixture will be. And so, right, when I was saying the notan, the focus of the notan is to simplify it so we can see our composition better. And then after we funnel it down like an hourglass, we've got to open it back up and recomplicate our values for the final object. So what am I doing is I'm adding in some darker values into the barn, like underneath the eaves. Down at the bottom, I'm going to daub off my brush just a little, and I'm going to use the belly of the brush to indicate this idea that there's a darker shadow at the base of the barn where it meets these little plants. And then I'm going to paint this little area inside the barn, right? So that was the dark, super black section. So I have burnt sienna and I have ultramarine blue, that's it. But now it's a little bit cooler than it was before. It's not just so warm. The gray is a cool gray this time. I'm trying to modulate what I have, which is just 3 paints, to do everything. So hopefully you can see in, by zoom, that this is definitely a darker section.
Yep.
Than the barn around it. And remember how we were having a problem telling the barn doors different, that it was that there was an interior and an exterior, and the notan made it clear, like, well, heck, it's just a big black blob. Where's the inside and the outside? So I saved that little rim that was going around the door, and just roughly indicated it. And so I'm saving that rim here too, but it's not like I'm cutting it out with an X-Acto knife, right? The goal is that it's broken and allows me to pass through it and go back and forth, but I can indicate it. If it's really a hard white line the whole way down, it actually divides the painting up too much. So we want to still have those little ways where we can weave the shapes together. So inside of the barn, it had a plant on the opposite side of the barn. We're looking through the barn, and we have this little broken up shape of a shadow through the barn door, and it's actually creating an additional frame. So I'm dropping in these little indications. It's just leaves. The only thing that's really important is that I very gently close the frame so that you're going from the barn, the dark barn, to the interior of the dark barn, which is another frame, to the interior of the dark barn is the pale door, but actually inside the pale door is the dark plant. And then behind the dark plant is the little light spot, right? And that's what makes this an interesting, that's to me, what makes it an interesting subject. And then this actually came across There's something in the barn that's gently breaking it open, dividing the space. I don't know what it is. It's just it's just a dark value. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then this comes across. It's a shadow. And it completes this little focal point. And pretty much from here on out, you can get away with a lot as long as the focal point is a little bit interesting to us. I'm going to come in here and I grab that dark paint and I have the brush is very delicately, it's thinned out. I'm just dropping in little tiny bits of dark values for the slats. There we go. Right? The barn does have to be interesting. If the barn isn't interesting, we're toast.
So a little more texture, a little more variety.
That's right. I'm going to do that thing where I'm taking the tip of the brush and I'm grabbing it and I'm going to flick paint like that. But I'm going to flick it down into the barn. I just want some natural texture, something I couldn't get elsewhere. And now let's paint that funny little object on the right-hand side. And the painting, by the way, it's still cool to the touch. The barn is still wet. So if I wanted to lift things out of the barn or whatever, I can definitely do that because I wet the back. The truth is we'll finish this demo and 30 minutes after the demo's done, I could still paint wet into wet.
Wow.
So
that's
yes,
amazing.
it's wonderful. It changed the way I painted. That's the truth. It changed the way I painted. Just let me.
I
Sorry, go
remember
ahead.
you showed us that when you did your last demo for us, and it was definitely an aha moment for me.
Yes, it just let me take on subjects that I couldn't do before. I don't know how these other people are doing it, but this is what it required me to, this is what I was needed. So I have a dark green that I mixed up. It's a dark blue green, and I'm dropping it in here to bond it to the shadowy darkness of the barn, right? These are plants that are in shadow for this little sketch. And then I'm going to gently bring the shadow out to the right. This is the cast shadow of the barn. It has little broken edges because we want to be able to weave our shapes together, right? So I'm still not painting little monolithic experiences. The goal is to travel through the painting, move from one area to another. I'm going to daub off the brush so I can do some dry brush work. And I'm very gently going to indicate plants along the back horizon line. I'm using the texture of the paper and the belly of the dry brush to begin to just create a little bit of a different value. That's in the notan too, because the notan made me feel like I really need to be able to recognize the that it's there.
Yeah.
It can't just disappear. And now we have to do this area over on the left. So if I was painting this on a full sheet and you know, I was going to sell it for a lot of bucks and become a millionaire, then I would draw it, right? Accuracy would be important. But for this, we get to play. So I have the image, I have the notan, so I have a sense of what it needs to look like, and I can just kind of design something that I think is going to be compelling. And the goal is to provide an alternative point of interest to this mini layered babushka doll experience that we have going on at the barn door, right? Contrast and is compelling to the human eye, and many interwoven shapes can be compelling as well. So I'm taking just the leftover dark valued mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna that I had from before. That came down, something sitting on the ground there, right? And then it sort of falls down into here into the ground. And I can add things. It's okay to add things. Like maybe in here, I think it's too static. I want to add a way to get into the barn. So the barn's going to have a little like pipe or something sticking out of it. And I want to add a couple things in so that I have a way to kind of enter and exit the shape of the barn. Like we're allowed to do that. And if I want to scratch the barn with my fingernail to add little squiggly lines, I want to rub some of it out and keep some of it. That's all part of the fun. And it adds a kind of texture that can be very appealing visually. The other thing we have in this is these little weeds that are off to the left. They help extend this sort of plane where the barn is sitting. And I'm going to make them warmer. So I'm going to grab a bunch of burnt sienna, and it's going to be just burnt sienna. So we're going to add an alternative color to this very green and brown subject. So it's very brown because it's burnt sienna. I'm going to add some ultramarine, some lemon yellow. I like to keep 2 wells of colors like this. So I have in my palette 2 wells of lemon yellow. One's for mixing greens and one's for mixing warm colors. And then I have 2, burnt sienna wells, 2 ultramarine wells, that kind of thing. That's oftentimes something that I like to do. One is because I use them so much, but it's also because it lets me sort of mix with impunity and totally ruin a whole well of yellow.
So you have 2, you're telling me you have 2 wells of exactly the same color, but when you're making a warm mix, you go into one, and when you're making a cold
100%.
mix, you're going into the other. Okay.
Yep.
All
So
right.
normally I have a whole well of lemon yellow just for mixing greens. And then I have a whole well of lemon yellow that I mix with browns and oranges where I want to mix some, varied yellow color. And then later on, I'll go clean this out. But while I'm doing the painting, it allows me to sort of mix and not fear ruining a yellow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's nice. And as I've started to reduce my palette to fewer and fewer colors, what ended up happening was I was like, well, I've got all these empty wells. What am I going to use them for? And if I was going painting, maybe for like a festival or something, I would need a lot of that certain color. So I began to just have multiple wells of it. But now I do it on purpose. So I'm just adding this in. It's got a little bit of heat to it to play against these other colors. I'm going to grab the pure lemon yellow, and I'm going to drop it in as well, wet into wet. Right? This is just, it actually is a sunlit scene. So I want it to have some heat to play against the dark shadows. Here, this shadow that I painted earlier, it's still wet. So when I come in here and I drop a little yellow into this, I'm still getting soft edges. And if I want to put a little bit of yellowy green into this tree, now the tree finally dried. There we go. So something did dry. I'm going to put a little bit of green in there to mix in. And then the thing that we had in the background was that little pole to help us kind of activate this big empty space. So the pole is far away. It's kind of in some sort of misty fog.
Steve, I've got another question for you here.
Sure.
Are you using paint pans, or do you fill the palette areas with tube paint?
I only use tube paint. And I just fill them up with the tube paint. If I'm going to travel, I let them sit out and dry out over a day or so to kind of get a little plasticky sheen over the top of them that I spritz them later to reactivate them. And I actually, when we were starting, I have my handy dandy spritzer, I actually think it's designed for cooking. And it's wonderful. And I actually pre-wet these wells so that they would be nice and soft and mushy and create lots of problems for me later. But they're perfect when I'm painting. Dirty yellow. So I have this mix. What I'm doing is adding more water to it, and I'm daubing it off. Why? Because I want to paint this little hole in the distance, but it has to feel like it's receding. So I'm going to turn the painting sideways because it's very hard to paint up and have it be straight. Like our body isn't designed to do that. It's much easier to paint sideways and have it be straight. So that's where this part, I just put that little thing I painted is what I drew. And then the rest of it, I daub it off on my little rag and up we go, right? And a little something in there. And it actually has a little wires in it. And they're a nice leading line. So what I'm going to do is turn the painting upside down because it's very easy ergonomically to make a wire in this direction, because that's the way the arm rotates, than it is to do it the other direction. There we go. Much harder to do it the other way and to have it land where I want. I find it very easy to just rotate on the hinge of the elbow. And then in the notan, underneath this little area in the back, we also have just a little bit of shadow. So I grab a blue-gray, a blue-green, right, and from this area, and I'm going to daub it off because I want it to be dry brushed. And now the brush is now flat instead of pointy. And I'm going to paint with the belly again. And I'm just letting it drag across the texture of the paper. And what we get is something like that. And it just indicates the idea that there's shadows in the distance without having to paint a big, strong shape. And it's 9 o'clock. So we're coming up on the ending of the little sketch. I'm just adding in little bits. But for me, the most important part of this demo, I mean, of course, there's the techniques of actually doing the painting. I don't deny the value in that. But I also think it's important to recognize that before I really did a notan and I just painted it directly, this is what I got. I think it's a perfectly average and serviceable painting, but I don't think it's as interesting for my eye to wander through as this is. This to me is more compelling and has removed parts of the painting like the sky that I found less interesting and allowed me other ways to create balance. So I have this little object on the far right and I have a more off-centered and it's not so static and in the middle. So the notan is the thing that if people took anything away from the demo, other than, you know, wetting the back of your paper, which I did think was an amazing thing, I would hope it would be the value in doing the notan and building a composition that you really like. We're going to be doing that in the workshop, as we're saying. So we're going to talk about different ways to have to build a compelling composition, how we focus on the focal point, how we try and create balance. We're going to do some exercises where people are going to do some abstract designs and with cutouts and things. And the goal is then to maybe build some paintings from those abstracts. Because the thought should be that if the abstract is compelling, if we can find a comparable set of shapes that would be a realistic painting, but the abstract is the guide, then the hard part is done, which is the composition, meaning the balance of the different shapes and how we have them arranged and where we want to have more white and where we want to have, you know, more dark and where we need a little extra something to make it pop. So we're going to be doing those notans. Yes.
Would it be possible to maybe take a piece of dark paper and cover up the white where the painting is supposed to end? Since you took the tape off,
Yes.
it's a little bit hard to tell.
I can at least do that.
All right, yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Boop. Right? Go back on here.
Okay,
So
yeah,
that,
that's helpful, yeah.
thank you. Yeah. When I'll take a photo of this for us to maybe share on Facebook.
Yeah,
And
that'd be great.
when I share it, I'll crop it
Okay,
so that
okay,
you'll just see, what it is that I've kept. I will say it's always helpful after you've completed the painting to let it sit. And also the lighting is very yellow right now because it's after hours. So I'll probably take a photo in the morning when the light is bluer and more natural, and then I'll crop it and send it out, and maybe we can share it then. Does that sound okay?
yeah, that sounds great. I'm wondering if maybe CWA could put the cropped one in their newsletter for the next newsletter.
That's a great idea. Yes. Well, and part of the reason I think it's worth waiting is that sometimes when we wait, we see little things that it's hard to see when we've just completed the painting, So I don't think it's a race to get to the end of the painting. I feel like if you need to have the painting sit for a day so that you can see, oh, this is too busy here, or we need something dark over here. That's not dark enough, or it dried and now it's not as dark as it used to be. I feel like, that sense of coming away from it and getting back to it is important. I feel like that's part of the process that people don't give enough credence to. So I'm going to try and practice that by stepping back from this and then coming back to it in the morning and seeing if there are little details that might change or alter to satisfy myself as an artist.
So Stephen, I can't go through all of them because there are just too many, but there are lots
Sure.
of compliments for this wonderful demo. People are saying that they really enjoyed it, that someone says that they haven't done the notan before, but they really liked learning about that.
Neat. Thank you. I'm glad about the
So
notan in particular.
That's a good fan mail.
Thank you.
Stephen, before
Yes.
you go, do you want to tell people about your new book?
Oh, that's very kind of you. Yes. So I do have a little book I made, and it's on the website underneath the book heading. You can buy it there. And it is a collection of recent paintings and poems that I've also written. And when my dad passed away, my stepdad passed away last June, I painted paintings afterwards. They're landscapes and things. And I wrote a lot. Again, I've written for years. And the book came out of that. So they're full color. They have them as 8x8s that are soft cover paintings, soft cover books. And I'm selling them for $20. That's what it costs to print them. I'm not really making any money off the books. I just want to remember him and share the poems and the paintings. And then I have hardcover ones, which are 10 inches by 10 inches. And those I sell for $40 plus shipping and handling. So they're on the website and you can get them there. And if you want to click through the website, it shows you could go to a blog post and so you can read the poems. And if you think it's of value to you to have that book, or that you might like to get it for somebody else who's lost someone and that seemed important to you, then you can go back and buy it then, right? I'm not going to make you buy the book to read the poems or see the paintings. If you like the paintings, just to say, it's nice to see them in full color, and you can kind of see them up close and printed, which is a pleasure as well. So that's been an interesting project, and it's neat to see the writing and the art come together after many years of having them be sort of separate endeavors. But the response has been very positive, and that's great. That's very pleasing to me. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that, Joe.
My
Stephen,
pleasure.
Stephen, is the Mary Oliver book that you were propping up your board on, is that poetry or prose?
This is Rules for the Dance. So I recently got this, and it is for poetry. It's a prose. Obviously, you're looking at this here. It's prose. She's talking about writing poetry
Okay.
and crafting it. Mary Oliver's fantastic. What a poet.
My favorite poem of hers is The Sun.
Okay, I'll look that up. We were just reading Wild Geese the other day, which is another amazing poem.
She was great.
She was great. Probably the greatest compliment I ever got was that somebody told me, this poem really reminds me of Mary Oliver.
Wow.
I said, I'll put that feather in my cap. I felt good for the rest of the day. She was an amazing poet. What a thinker and feeler.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for asking about the Mary Oliver.
Yeah.
Steve, if you'll get us, I know you're going to put it on Facebook, but I'll include your final painting and the notan in the video that we'll post on on YouTube.
That's a great idea. I will send
that
that to you as well.
Yeah, if you send me that, I'll embed it into the video.
And
If I send
somebody requested you put it on your blog too. So
I will, because I know there are some people who know me through the blog. So once the video goes up, I'll share that video and talk about it on the blog. And it's yes. So the short answer is it'll go up on the blog.
And have a couple of people here that commented your book is so wonderful.
Oh,
so
thank you very much.
Good to hear too, I'm sure.
Yes. Right. That was a private experience that it's been very positive to share publicly. Has a lot of P's in one sentence, but so I made that for me, but it's touched some other people, and that's very edifying.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has just been a delight. I'm really looking forward to your workshop.
Yes, me too.
Many are too. So
wonderful.
Thank you, Stephen.
thanks.
Thank you,
for coming out
everybody.
tonight.